when I play Baldur's Gate.
In today's audio,
enjoy,
this clip is actually taken from a momentous occasion, actually,
listening to
when
spiritual
Naropa
things.
University was
It's not
opened in
told
Colorado.
So,
There were two
Ramdas
schools
movie
of
night,
thought that
best
came
of
together
Blue
to
retreat,
teach.
finding harmony in the
Ramdas was one of
sacred.
them, the other was
Let's play
Buddhism.
some Baldur's Gate.
And he taught on the Bhagavad Gita. And the Bhagavad Gita it actually means the song of God is what that means. Gita means song. It's a small portion of an epic sacred poem called the Mahabharata. I'll just give you a very brief outline of the story so that when you hear what Ramdas is saying, and the characters will have a slight context for it. Like every good story, there is darkness versus light, and the need to find the light to remove the darkness. And darkness being a space where we're unclear about things, we're hurtful to each other, and so on. And there's one of the main characters on the, let's just call them the side of lightness. I don't want to say good or bad, but they're the ones who are supposed to be bringing the Dharma to the world by living it. And those are the Pandavas. And one of the brothers' names is Arjuna. And they're all immaculate warriors. They've trained to fight battles since they were children, using spiritual missiles, mantra, power,
war against the
intelligence,
slavers.
Discrimination. They've studied with gurus to get to where they've gotten to be able to govern people. The main character in this story is actually Lord Krishna. Because he's God, he's on everybody's side. And so this moment arises in the story where Arjuna realizes that war is about to start, and he realizes that he's going to have to kill all his cousins. And he questions if this is the right thing for him to do. So in this recording, you will hear Ramdas reading from this passage and bringing up some points.
I have been born many times, Arjuna, and many times hast thou been born. But I remember my past lives, and thou hast forgotten thine. That line by way of review of our last discussion, which concerned the matter of reincarnation, which is Krishna's first presentation to Arjuna of the beginning of the seeds of what is called the higher wisdom, or giving him a perspective about exactly what dance he thinks he's playing, which means us. Now Krishna begins to throw out to Arjuna. Arjuna is faced, as we've all realized, with this conflict. And Krishna starts to throw out to Arjuna a number of alternative justifications for why he should get on with it, why he should get into the struggle of the spirit versus the worldly, or dharma and adharma, or the battle of Kurukshetra. And one of the arguments that he just throws away in 2 shlokas, which is one that you would give to a materialist, really, of somebody very worldly. He says, for all things born in truth must die, and out of death in truth comes life. Face to face with what must be, cease thou from sorrow. But if he were born again and again, and again he were to die, even then, victorious man, cease thou from sorrow. Meaning, look, you're going to die whether you like it or not, and so are all those people on the other side. So what are you getting so freaked about? It's all inevitable. It's all in the cards. Death definitely follows birth. It's the way the game's designed. So don't get so upset about it.
Only because you ask nice.
That argument doesn't do much for Arjuna. And it's, as I say, just put in lightly. Now,
Subterfuge.
Krishna then starts to deal with a fallacy that is common at the time. It was a very strong cultural belief at the time, because there was a philosophy called Sankhya philosophy. And Sankhya philosophy separated what was called Purusha and Prakriti. And Purusha was the inactive, and Prakriti was the active. And they really had very little to do with one another. The inactive was always inactive, and the active was always active. And the game in Sankhya philosophy was to get out of the active and into the inactive. And the highest goal of Sankhya philosophy was to do nothing, was to just not act. And Krishna says, not by refraining from action does man attain freedom from action. For not even for a moment can a man be without action. Helplessly are all driven to action by the forces born of nature. He who withdraws himself from actions, but ponders on their pleasures in his heart, he is under a delusion and is a false follower of the path. Now that last one sneaks in another thought, which all of us are very intimately familiar with. That's, for example, the one of I'm brahmachari, I don't have sex. And then I'm not having sex. I haven't had sex all day. It's like giving up smoking, you know. If you know when you meet somebody who's given up smoking, that's clearly who they are. Who are you? I am somebody who's given up smoking for 2 weeks, 4 hours, and 32 minutes at this point, right? And their thought forms, they are practically smoking a pack an hour in terms of the thought and the karma they're creating. But that's sneaking that in, and we're going to talk about that later. The main point here is that Krishna is saying to Arjuna, you're not going to get out of this by just sitting around. See, Arjuna said, I'm not going to fight. And he threw down his bow, and Krishna said, tough, you're not going to get away with it that easy. Because that philosophy is a fallacy. Because you're going to do something, and whatever you're going to do is going to have karma connected with it. And then he proceeds to explain to Arjuna at the level that Arjuna can hear it. Because Arjuna is a kshatriya, he's a warrior, he's a doer, he's an actor, he's a really good guy doer. And he's explaining at the level he can understand it. He says, do your duty. Do your duty. Do what you're supposed to do. Take your part in it. Play your part. And these shlokas. Think thou also of thy duty, and do not waver. There is no greater good for a warrior than to fight in a righteous war. There is a war that opens the door to heaven, Arjuna. Happy the warriors whose fate is to fight such a war. We are here at Naropa involved in the war that opens the doors to heaven. It's the inner war each of us is going through. Happy the warrior. It's our grace that we are able to fight this battle. But to forego this fight for righteousness is to forego thy duty and honor. Now he's starting to talk about the concept of dharma. And the word dharma means so many different things, but here let's just limit it to the very traditional cultural use in Hinduism, meaning your duty. It's your dharma. He's a kshatriya, and kshatriyas fight. Right? To not do it is to fall into transgression. And then he says, if you don't do your duty, then you watch, it's all going to turn terrible. Men will tell of thy dishonor both now and in times to come. And to a man who is in honor, dishonor is more than death. The great warriors will say that thou hast run from the battle through fear. And those who thought great things of thee will speak of thee in scorn. And thine enemies will speak of thee in contemptuous words of ill will and derision, pouring scorn upon thy courage. Can there be for a warrior a more shameful fate? In death, thy glory in heaven, in victory, thy glory on earth. Arise, therefore, Arjuna, with thy soul ready to fight. And in chapter 3, do thy duty, even if it be humble, rather than another's, even if it be great. To die in one's duty is life, to live in another's is death. Now, in the Hindu tradition, there are, as you know, the castes, of which the Kshatriya is a caste. This is a division of the society, and originally these divisions were brought down through consciousness by the rishis, and later on we'll talk about when those things were harmonious and how, as man fell out of the spirit, they became disharmonious. Man and woman fell out of the spirit. And also in India there are the ashramas, or stages of life. There is the period of 0 to 20 when you're a child and then a student, 20 to 40 when you're a householder, 40 to 60 when you go out to study and make pilgrimages, do religious study, and 60 to 80 when you become a sannyas. You renounce everything. You renounce all worldly things and all spiritual things, and you become a renunciate. And these are formal structures. Now, theoretically, if you were a Kshatriya at a certain age, there would be a very clearly defined Vedic prescription for what exactly you should be doing today. Just an absolutely clear structure. It's like a grid that's been defined for appropriate action. And Krishna is saying to Arjuna, do what is appropriate. Now, we in this country are faced with considerable confusion about that, because it isn't clear what we're supposed to be doing at any moment. There aren't clear cultural prescriptions that are deeply ingrained in the society. There are some rough ones, but they're being thrown about pretty loosely. And so we're faced with having to listen to hear what our dharma is, how our individual differences determine what is our suitable duty at the moment. I think you begin to get a sense that when you've got a husband or a wife and you've got a baby, that defines certain limiting conditions or certain possibilities. That if you have certain intellect or certain economics, you have certain possibilities. That if you're rich, that defines in part your dharma. You can't make believe you're not rich, and throwing it away isn't going to get rid of it. That was a karmic act. And you begin to have to be responsible about your money. That becomes your dharma at that point. And what Krishna is saying is, the game only works if everybody does their dharma, so do yours. And that is familiar to you, those of you that are familiar with the Bible, from Paul, Romans 12. For as we have many members in one body, and all members have not the same office, so we, being many, are one body in Christ, and every one members one of another. Having then gifts differing according to the grace that is given to us, whether prophecy, let us prophesy according to the proportion of faith, or ministry, let us wait on our ministering, or he that teacheth on teaching, or he that exhorteth on exhortation, he that giveth, let him do it with simplicity, he that ruleth with diligence, he that showeth mercy with cheerfulness. Like, what your part is, play it. Just play it. Right? Do your duty. And that's the lowest level of the concept of dharma. Find out what your little square in the grid is, and then do it perfectly.
Easy enough.
Why you're going to do it remains to be seen. We're going to be discussing that. But this part of it is, Krishna is saying, just do it.
The only way that I can find my way through what I experience as suffering from what I see that's going on around the world or with someone who's very close to me is my own reaction to a situation. The great beings, the higher beings like Krishna, and this is a very difficult thing to say because it's hard for me to even understand it, is that actually everything is perfect. What does that mean? Have you heard that before? Yeah. So it's a perfect battleground for us. And how are we going to find our way through this? And like Krishna says to Arjuna, like, you can't do anything because it's going to have consequences one way or the other. So you guide yourself by what your duty is, what you understand as your duty. And for him, at that level, that small cube, as Ramdas called it, was to be a warrior. And we're all warriors here. Peaceful warriors. And practice is what I need to hold on to find a foundation for everything that I try to do in my life. You know, none of us is perfect. We're all human. We all can be hurtful. We all feel hurt too. And so the practice is to help us find our place into that, into our own hearts, a sense of peace, a place of no fear, a place of openness and compassion with wisdom and discernment and understanding. And this is what Krishna is trying to share with Arjuna in this story, because he is that. Krishna is that. And it's hard to understand that in the mind. These practices come from a place where, as you do them, they blossom inside of you, so your own wisdom arises. Your own wisdom, which ultimately is beneficial for everyone. It's not a thought.
Yes, fine.
It's an understanding and an acceptance of things in a certain way.
What now?
That's how I feel about what I heard, Spring.
I mean, the story is so... I mean, first of all, you have this poem with the Bhagavad Gita, and it's like, that's chapter 1. Right, we set the stage that we're on this spiritual battlefield, and it reminds me a lot of Siddhartha under the Bodhi tree, right, having this battle with Mara, the architect of all the demons, right, the creator of all the demons, right, the mastermind. And it does feel like, you know, for all of us,
my strong suit.
you know, we're doing that work of seeing what is true. And I love in this chapter of the Bhagavad Gita that Arjuna is confused about what to do, because that also is us. Like, there's this confusion of how to meet the moment, how to meet on an internal level and then on an external level, you know? And what do we do in this world with all of its suffering? And then hold it as perfection.
Yeah.
Right? It's like the perfect suffering, but it also reminds me of Suzuki Roshi, who would tell his students, you're all perfect, but you have some work to do. Right? It's all perfect, but there's some work to do here, right? And how do we move? I mean, this is this ongoing debate, and we keep having it behind the scenes. We get, there's a, you know, let's just chant our way through, and other people, you can't chant your way through. Then we come back to, yes, we must chant our way through, right?
I say we can, but...
Yeah, and you know, and it's like, well, what is our dharma? There's those who will chant and sing, and then there's those that will enter into the battleground, right? And somehow we're all connected in healing it, and then, you know, we're all in this dance with this maya, this illusion. And from the Buddhist perspective, you know, we talk about conventional reality, and the conventional reality is, my name is Spring, and we're here in North Carolina, and we're at a retreat, and, you know, all these names and labels. And then there's this ultimate reality, you know, the Buddha was always pointing to, we're just stars. It's just quantum physics. They're just particles of light bumping into each other. But if you live in that realm only, and that's the challenge, as I see a lot of people that we're just light, there's nothing happening, right? But there is something happening. And Krishna is like, yes, here's this, Arjuna, yes, we are God, but something's happening and something needs to be attended to. But if we only focus on the 3D reality of this like karmic level, we fight, but we fight in a delusional way. Right? We don't see the vastness of our being. We don't see, and I like that Krishna had to show Arjuna that vastness before Arjuna was like, okay, I'm ready. Let's begin. Like, I need to remember that this is all happening. And we're just rainbow bodies. Right? But that complexity, and we put this back on the community to sort through. It's not just like we're going to tell you the answer. How do we know? We're still sorting this out. This is the Bhagavad Gita, right? It's a poem that is lived into moment to moment. It wasn't a decided conversation fully. It was an inquiry of a conversation between God and Arjuna. So what we invite you into is to have it. To have the conversation, like, who am I? Where do I stand? What is my dharma in this moment? What did I come to bring? What am I awakening? What do I believe? Not in a mental chatter, but feel in your body, right? What does the heart wake up and sometimes the heart just moves, right? Like we wake up and we find ourselves involved in something, and we pick ourselves up and we're out on the front lines of something, and it's like, how did you get here? I don't know. Compassion brought me here. It's not the mind doing it, right? It's like, oh, love brought me here, right? It's bigger than that.
We're going to experience a homecoming. I'll tell you, I experienced that as I keep opening my heart and accept my part in the sea of humanity, in the process of it, and start to allow that quality of compassion to come forth, and the kind of that quality, I experience the feeling of coming home. I feel like I come home into family. I come home into place. I come home into the harmony of things. I think that the conditions are available for us to feel that feeling. And I think as each individual feels it, then they become an instrument through which others feel it. I think it is a heart-to-heart process of coming home into that feeling of being at home. Because the statement, like I remember being in a motel on tour. I had been on tour for about 6 months, and I was in a motel, and after that, a few later, I was going to go back to a place that was my base camp, that was sort of my apartment. And I thought, I came in and I sat down in this, I don't know whether it was a Motel 6 or a Ramada Inn or something. It was a plastic place with predictable qualities to it. And I sat down and I thought, only 2 more weeks and I can go home. And then I thought, isn't that a bizarre concept? Why aren't I home now? Because since I'm on the road most of the time, I'm always I'm not being home. So I got up and I walked out of the motel door, closed the door, I walked down the corridor, and I came back and I opened the door and I yelled, I'm home. You know that feeling of I'm home? And I came in and I said, I'm home. I'm home in the universe. If I'm not home now, when will I be home? And it did something to my consciousness. And I must say, I experienced that I am at home on earth. And then behind that, I experienced I am at home in the spirit.
Strong suits.
Ram Dass speaking to embracing it all, particularly. Those words he lived, certainly after his stroke and when his last years in Maui, he really did embrace it all. I mean, just amazing. And created an example of being at home with whatever he was encountering. It was, both of those things were supremely important to us as he reflected them to everybody who was around him. And it's really the essence of how we engage around balance and taking those examples. I just want to quote from a podcast that I did earlier with a woman named Lisa. The minute I began to welcome my unwanted guests with kindness, all the dark thoughts, etc., that we all have day to day, sending metta toward each thought, feeling, and corner of sadness in my heart, that's when I felt the real taste of healing in my life. Meeting what is present with kindness teaches us the profound lesson of letting go into our human experience, even into all of the unwanted stuff. Ultimately, it gives us the resources of compassion, big-heartedness, and we'll say also His Holiness quotes all the time, warm-heartedness, I love that, and inclusivity. So much so that I've come to call self-kindness a practice of radical inclusion. Great quote. Can you comment, both of you?
Well, I mean, I think that's actually the secret ingredient of mindfulness, like when we say we're being mindful of our experience without judging, without condemning ourselves, and all of that. What does that imply? First of all, that's not that easy. And second of all, it implies a kind of basis of presence that's infused with, as Ram Dass would say, loving awareness. And I've seen people try to reframe the word mindfulness a lot these days. They say it sounds so cold and so clinical unless you actually know what it means. And some people say, let's call it kindfulness or warm mindfulness or heartfulness or and again, there was Ram Dass who really emphasized loving awareness, and that's the whole point. It's got to be in there, otherwise we're on the same train of self-judgment we're used to, and it's not really the same.
Yeah, Dave?
So I just want to tell a very short story about Sharon and me.
Oh, okay.
Well, first of all, she married my son, and I hope you don't take that the wrong way. She officiated the wedding.
That also could use an addendum since they're no longer together.
Yeah, disappointingly for me, but because that would have been amazing. But Sharon, in our world, which is the formal Tibetan Buddhist kind of lineage and progression, for us, for my community, she holds a very special seat that I just want to acknowledge going forward, which is she's the throne holder of the Metta tradition as far as Dharma Moon is concerned. We use her books when we're teaching on that topic, and I consider, Metta in the Tibetan tradition is related to, but more Tonglen and the kind of compassion practices are probably emphasized more. So when I wanted to present these teachings, I basically brought on Sharon in my heart and mind as our guru for this. So I just want to acknowledge that. And then a short story, which is she came to, I think, a Shambhala center and was giving a talk, and I drove you home that night. I don't know if you remember this or not.
You were my driver for many, many an occasion.
Yeah, we've had some real good road trips together. But we were talking about, metta. Do you all know metta, that practice? But it's a practice of sending out 4 wishes, or many wishes, to other people for their benefit. May you be safe, may you be happy, may you be healthy, may you be at ease. And you just repeat that or contemplate that. And it kind of it's like putting water through your plumbing, and it just cleans it out, and you just find yourself having those thoughts and feeling that way. So I was driving her home in the city, and we pulled into a street and there was, in New York, they have garbage trucks and they just park in the middle of the street. And so I'm going, okay, we're going to be here for 15 minutes now. And I'm starting to do my New York thing of like, you know. And Sharon just goes to the garbage man in the car, and she just says, may you be safe, may you be happy, may you be healthy, may you be right in the street. And I said, Sharon, really? So I think she's walking it like she's talking it. You know, it's very beautiful. Anyhow, I just wanted to share that.
Can we talk a little bit about practice? When we talk about, and His Holiness says, kindness is my only religion. When we talk about putting into effect on a day-to-day basis, and I suppose, you know, we are talking about compassionate mindfulness. Maybe you can expand on that, Sharon.
Well, I think, you know, that as a practice, you know, ultimately it's actually based on being able to pay attention. What are you all doing? Differently. You know, so rather than seeing the practice as something where we're trying to presume a feeling we don't really have, or being hypocritical or covering over maybe some really difficult feelings, I really do see it as paying attention differently. So it's like this bold little experiment to check out what happens. So, for example, if you are the kind of person who tends to evaluate yourself at the end of the day, like, how did I do today? And if you are the kind of person who pretty well only remembers and even fixates on the mistakes you made and the problems you had and the way you didn't show up the way you had hoped to and all of that, it's almost like, what happens if I like change the channel for a little bit and wish myself well? It doesn't mean you're perfect. It doesn't mean you're going to overlook the problems, but that obsession we tend to have with what's wrong with me and with others, you know, is something we can challenge. And that's what we do with the phrases. Or if you think about all the many, many beings we encounter, we don't really look at, we look through, we kind of objectify or discount. Maybe somebody we even meet now and then, you know, works in some store we go to a lot, but we don't ever really relate to them as a person, you know? And through silently, assuming you're in the store, for sure, silently, repeating those phrases, you know, that David just described, it's like we're actually looking at them instead of through them. And you see what happens, what emerges out of that. And certainly there are all the many, many occasions where we're maybe talking to somebody and we're not really there, and so we're not really connecting. We're thinking about the email we need to write, or you're looking around the room thinking, who would I rather be talking to, or like anybody, you know? And if you realize that and you sort of make the mental gesture, which is exactly what we do in meditation practice, of gathering your energy and coming back and returning, then you're creating the conditions where a connection can actually arise. And so that's what the metta means loving kindness. That's what the loving kindness practice actually does. That's how it functions. And so sometimes people get really squeamish, like, I'm going to have to, you know, act like I really care when I don't, you know, at all. And it's not like that.
Yeah. Important point, I would say.
These things are sometimes mushy and kind of touchy-feely, and so the element of precision, at Dharma Moon we have this threefold logic that we really got from Pema, Sharon, which is gentleness, precision, and letting go. Those three, we really move through those three parameters.
Say that again, Dave.
Gentleness, precision, and letting go, which is from a chapter by Pema Chodron in The Wisdom of No Escape. So I think what Sharon, I don't want to turn this into a love poem to you, but it's happening. Is the mix of gentleness and precision which is what I so much admire in her speech. You know, you can talk about these things and you try to get some vague sense of, yeah, what does it mean to wish people well, and is it hokey pokey, and is it kind of gooey and not clarifying and not precise and not accurate and not genuine, not authentic. But the precision element is in what the way Sharon is expressing this. I really admire it. So I just want to say that.
Oh, thank you. And actually, I wasn't thinking about me, but I was thinking about the Dalai Lama. In that, you and I, David and Raghu, also actually been to many teachings together. Listening to the Dalai Lama, and there's something about when you observe him, a kind of naturalness to his presence and loving kindness toward others. I don't ever get the feeling that he's sitting there thinking, God, you are boring, but I am the Dalai Lama, so I have to act like, I really listen. There's just something so alive in that. And that's really the state we're talking about, being able to cultivate.
Sharon, you remember one time, this is a long time back, retreats that we were doing in Maui, and someone brought up, or you were speaking to rather, the concept of love, which is difficult for us. So we're so used to the transactional definition of that word. And do you remember what you said? Well, it's hard to talk about. You don't. I'm going to remind you. Talk about love. It's difficult because people think it's weak. I'll never forget that. You remember that? Talk about that. It was in relation to loving awareness.
Well, I think in terms of, say, loving awareness or teaching loving kindness, and I'm sure David can speak to this as well, I find that there are two major controversies I've encountered. One is the idea that to be loving is to be weak. Just like you said, Raghu, it's stupid, it's sentimental, it's going to mean you're going to lose all intensity, you're not going to be able to take a stand, you're just going to be a pushover. And which, of course, we don't believe nor experience. And the other controversy is I see, or I've experienced, as a kind of East-West divide. I find that in the West, there's often a concept that the amount of love or compassion we are capable of is a given. We're kind of static or stuck, and if you don't have any, you're out of luck. But in the Eastern philosophy, certainly within, say, Buddhist teaching, absolutely it's believed we can cultivate these strengths, we can grow them, we can develop them, we can train them, in effect, because these are emergent properties of how we pay attention. And if we pay attention differently, we know that's what meditation practice actually is learning how to pay attention differently. These qualities, which, might have been in somewhat short supply in our lives because of our background or conditioning or whatever, they can grow. They do grow. They flower. They get unaccountably stronger, for us. And so, in terms of the first, I would often think about, as I've said many times, like amongst my friends who met Nimkrali Baba, for example, as an exemplar of love. People all these years later don't seem to be looking back and thinking, God, what a weak guy, it's a little pathetic, I was young then, so I thought of it one way, but now I see, it was like total waste. I mean, it's the singular experience everyone all these years later refers to as, I saw there was a power of love that I hadn't quite imagined before, and that stayed, so it's really not at all a weakness as we look at it in our lives. It's a tremendous strength.
When we were in Kenchi with Maharaji, we had several mentors that were extraordinarily important to us. And one was K.K. Shah, who I think many of you know. those of you who had the opportunity to be with Ram Dass when he was still alive in Maui, KK came to several retreats there. The other was K.C. Tuari, and Krishna Das has talked a lot about him in his evenings. He was basically his Indian father, and he was a father to many of us. An amazing yogi, actually. There's a beautiful movie that we did called Brilliant Disguise, the Samadhi of K.C. Tuari, which you can all access through the usual Amazon Prime and Apple and all of that. It's well worth watching. And then one other being named Dada Mukherjee, who basically was like Hanuman to Maharaji. And the way that he was harmonized with Maharaji was so obvious and so incredible. We would be standing in the ashram, in the back of the ashram with him, many's a time. He was the only person that Maharaji let smoke cigarettes. So he would be smoking his cigarette, and all of a sudden he'd throw the cigarette down and turn, and at that moment you'd hear Maharaji yell out, "Dada!" And that's how much he was tuned in. Each one of these beings, in their own way, had found themselves with KK's. KK was just completely in this dance with Maharaji of total enjoyment of just being there with him. And KK got the boon to be as a child for the rest of his life, which he was. And then K.C. Tuari was, for us, the living example of someone who went into deep absorption states called samadhi, where Maharaji just looked at him, just turned to him, didn't touch him or anything, and he'd go into incredible states that we observed with him over time outside of him being with Maharaji. So all three of these beings had a really special way in which they were completely harmonized with Maharaji. I mean, I wouldn't have thought of it that way then, but as we thought about this retreat and the theme of it, I thought, wow, you know, they were perfect examples of that kind of harmony. And that extended into their lives with their families, with us. You know, how we got from them so much about, not just obviously with Maharaji, they would translate, but also just being with them, with their families, and seeing the kind of harmony that they had with these, something that we never really experienced, or maybe a little bit, maybe some of us, but our families were not we did not come from harmonious families in America, for sure. And why don't you speak to that a little, Krishnadas, in terms of what you experienced with, in particular with KC, being in that family.
After Maharaji left the body, or whatever he did, I pretty much forced the Tuaris to adopt me. I would arrive at their doorstep with all my luggage, just move in. And I would sleep on the couch. For the first few years, I would sleep on the couch. And the whole house was happening around me, but it never bothered me. I didn't need my own space. Like, you know, in America, I shut my door, I locked my door, you know, but in India, they let me be me. I realized later it was a functional family. Who knew? They would yell and argue and fight, but nobody was afraid that. anyone would throw them out of their hearts. It was not even, it was impossible to even think about that.
My strong suit. What now?
One time, I had heard some lines of a prayer with the words, Narayani Namostute. So I said, Baba, I called Casey, Baba. I said, Baba, you ever hear this? Oh, yes. Really? Could you teach it to me? Oh, yes. So we were sitting in the living room, and he started to recite the prayer, and I started to write very slowly. I was writing it down. But within about 30 seconds, he forgot I was there, and he started going faster and faster. And about 10 minutes later, he's going, Om Narayani, Om Narayani. Oh. He just went into samadhi right in front of my eyes. It really pissed me off.
Subterfuge is my strong suit.
I couldn't get a taste of this to save my miserable ass, and he couldn't stay out of it long enough to teach me one miserable prayer. And you know, he's not breathing, you understand? He's not breathing, and tears are streaming down his cheeks. So Ma comes in the room, Mrs. Tiwari comes in to get the teacups. We've been drinking tea. He'd been drinking milk, he didn't take tea. So I said, Ma, look, when will he come back? And she picked up the teacup, she just smiled and said, don't know. And went back in the kitchen, leaving me with this crying corpse. Not only did we have Dada, Tiwari, and KK and others, but Sydney Mao was there at the time, but we didn't meet her then. We only met her after he left the body, and then she started to come out and meet with people in a different way. But for all those years, she and Jivanti Ma stayed with Maharaji, and they served him. And one time in Vrindavan, we were sitting out with him at night in a big empty courtyard. And all the Westerners were on one side of the tucket, the bed. And just slowly, 3 or 4 ladies came out of the back of the rooms, and they sat on the other side of the tucket. Maharaji looked at us and he said, who are those ladies? And he said to me, I said, they're the goddess. Nay, who are those ladies? I said, they're your ma's. Nay. Then he looks at me and goes, Radha Sita Nehe? Aren't they actually Radha and Sita? You know, this is the world, the universe he lives in. So this the last day in Kinchi, the day he left and went down to Agra, and then the next day is when he left the body. Tiwari wanted to, there's actually a video of it. Draupadi made this video. It's about a minute long, something, 2 minutes long. There's maybe a total of about 8 minutes of video of Maharaji, maybe total 9 minutes. Anyway, so Maharaji put Tiwari in a very deep state. Later on, he said, this was the deepest I ever went. And in the video, you could see him smashing him on the head, trying to bring him back, pushing his head back like this. And finally, Tiwari comes back, and he's completely out of it, you know. So then they walked out of the back room into the middle room, and then up to the door that leads out into the courtyard. And Maharaji turns with Tiwari, and they face inside the room, and Siddhi Ma is there with Jivanti Ma. And Maharaji, she's weeping, and Maharaji's weeping. And he's saying, I can never repay the debt I owe to you. No one has ever served me like you've served me. No one will ever serve me like you've served me. And they're all weeping. And then Maharaji turns and faces the courtyard.
Hello. Yes. I think that's all for today, guys. Thanks for watching.